Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Mohammad Syuhairi bin Azaddin with metric number 2200840. This presentation video is for subject LLS 3353 Research Methodology. In this video, I will present my research proposal with the topic of comparative study of culture between Aceh and Malaysia. Okay, so these are the contents of my presentation, which consists of 4 sections. The first one is introduction, second is literature review, third is methodology, and last but not least is conclusion. Now I will start with the introduction, research background. So as we know, each country have their own uniqueness and culture. They have their very own culture as an identity of their group. In Malaysia, it is a country that full of cultural practices from all around the world, since Malaysia is a multiracial country. For example, we have 4 different types of celebration: Chinese New Year, Deepavali, Hari Raya, and Christmas. Meanwhile, in Aceh, their culture are based on the Islamic teaching. Aceh is known as Serambi Mekah since there are a very strong influence of Islam there. In their culture, they only practicing related things with Islam. It's really different like in Malaysia. In Aceh, they only celebrate Hari Raya. Okay, so this research solely to find out the comparison of Malaysia and Aceh culture. Okay, so the next one is problem statement. There are a few problems between these two countries when it comes to culture. One of it is cultural claims, where each country believes that the culture that being practices was theirs. The next one is lacks in-depth knowledge and information. This is because there is not much research has been conducted regarding this topic, which causing the conflict. Last but not least is the similarities in culture has raised sensitive issue and problem. As I mentioned earlier, culture is the identity of the certain group. If the culture is being practiced by other group, they lost their identity. For example, the origin of Silat. Other people will confuse where it really come from, which causing the origin place of Silat lost their identity. The next one is research objective. There are 3 objectives of this research, which are to identify the similarities and differences between Malaysia's culture and Aceh's culture. The second objective is to determine on how both cultures relate to each other. Last but not least is to propose a solution in solving cultural claims between those two countries. Now moving on to research question. There are 3 research questions, which is: what are the similarities and differences between Malaysia's culture and Aceh culture? The second one is: how are both countries' culture related to each other? Last but not least is: what is the solution in solving the cultural claims between Malaysia and Aceh? Okay, so now we'll discuss more in significance of research. So the significance of this research is to ensure that the cultural clash between these two countries to be put an end. Since we are a neighboring country, it would be better if there are no conflict among them. This research also could help the next researcher in conducting a similar research. Last but not least is this research could give knowledge to the society for a better understanding regarding the similarities and differences of culture in Malaysia and Aceh. Now, limitation of the research. Each research have their own problem. In this research, there are 3 problems. One of it is the distance of the country. It will be difficult for the researcher to go to Aceh in conducting or make a field trip there. Another problem is the researcher couldn't conduct an interview physically. Last but not least is due to the language barrier. Due to the language barrier, the researcher might have problem in communicating with the respondent. Okay, so moving on to the next one, which is literature review. Firstly, I'll talk about the definition of comparative study. Comparative study is a contrast of 2 or more things or concepts. Basically, it demonstrates the differences or similarities between 2 subjects. In this research, the researcher will compare the culture of Malaysia and Aceh. Next is the definition of culture. Culture refers to a collection of people's quality and knowledge, which include language, religion, cuisine, social behavior, music, and arts. Culture is a pattern of human activity as well as the symbolic framework that give its actions, meaning and purpose. Culture also becomes the identity of a group of people or the community where the cultures that they practice represent themselves. For example, a Malay represent themselves by wearing baju Melayu and baju kurung. Okay, so the next one is clash of culture. Clash of culture occurs when there are differences in cultural values and beliefs. Different perspective or the community towards the culture became the reason of cultural clash. It also occurs because the public lack of knowledge and agreement towards something. For example, the recipe of rendang's Malaysia and Aceh's rendang is totally different. It is indeed true that rendang originated from Indonesia, but since Malaysia have their own recipe in making it, they claim it as their very own cuisine, which triggered the Indonesian and causing the cultural clash. Next, we'll talk about theoretical framework. In this section, I will discuss about the theory that will be used in conducting the research. Okay, so the theory will be used is cultural representation theory. By Hall will be used as a framework in this research. It could be divided into three sections: reflective approach, intentional approach, and constructionist approach. Okay, so reflective approach is like a mirror. When we see something, it is what it is. No other meaning behind it. Meanwhile, intentional approach is there's a meaning of something that other people couldn't know or see it. Only you yourself know the meaning behind of it. Last but not least is constructionist approach. It is where when we see something, it reminds us to the past event or situation. Okay, so moving on to the next one, which is methodology. I'll discuss about the research design. Research design is a strategy that will be utilized to carry out the research. It is to provide a plan of study in conducting the research. In this research, the researcher will use mixed method, which are qualitative and quantitative. Okay, so qualitative is a non-numerical data, which means there are no statistic, no numbering or whatsoever. It's more to video or audio. This kind of approach is applied to get a comprehensive understanding of a situation. In this qualitative approach, the researcher will conduct an interview. Okay, so quantitative research is where it deals with the data that could be translated into numbers. It's the opposite of qualitative. In this method, it is using the statistic in dealing with the data collection, the analysis, and the presentation of numerical data. In this quantitative approach, the researcher will conduct a questionnaire to public, which are 50 people from Malaysia and 50 people from Aceh. Okay, so now the population and sampling. The focus or targeted population is Malaysian and Acehnese, since this research is related to both countries. The purpose of target population is to ensure the data that was gained is valid and equal. Okay, so moving on to the next one is data collection. As I mentioned earlier, there are two approaches that I will use. Under qualitative research, the researcher will do an interview. Meanwhile, under quantitative research, the researcher will do a questionnaire. Okay, so the interviews will be conducted with a cultural officer from both countries. For the questionnaire, the researcher will use Google Form as a platform. Okay, last but not least is the conclusion. In conclusion, this research is important in fixing the current situation, which is the cultural claim and clash of culture. This research also gives knowledge to both nations regarding the similarities and differences in terms of their culture. This research also will help the next researcher in conducting the research related to this topic. Okay, so that's all from me. Assalamualaikum.